competing in powerlifting, obviously you're going to be squatting. So in bodybuilding, it's definitely a different purpose. So our main thing to think about is our goal. So your goal for bodybuilding, usually it's bringing up certain body parts. And depending on what those body parts are, is going to depend what exercises we should be selecting. So typically for squat, we can emphasize different parts of the muscle. We could emphasize more quads or hams or glutes. For certain instances, it might not be necessary to squat. And for certain people, it might not be necessary to squat too. And that definitely depends on leverages, how long certain joint structure, and also mobility as well. So for bodybuilding, I think it's a great exercise if you need a movement where you're going to have greater hip flexion, and you'll see that once we start squatting. And that if you're having more hip flexion to where you're actually pushing your butt back, you're going to be using more hams and glutes. And so if that's not a huge emphasis area for you, and you need to bring up maybe more quads, even like a hack squat or a front squat might be your primary exercise that you're really focusing on. You can still squat, but maybe that would be a secondary or a movement to do towards the end. So let's look at our actual setup for doing a squat. So we've gone as far as we do need to be squatting for bodybuilding. It is a movement that's going to improve our physique. So the actual setup is you can vary a little bit, but initially for the first thing is, we need to pick how far apart we're going to be gripping the bar. And that really comes down to shoulder mobility. Some people cannot grip the bar close in. It just puts too much stress on the shoulders. If that's an issue, you can always grip outside and go really wide. That's usually an easier spot to go. If you still want to squat, and you can't, it's hard for you to do a straight bar. There's also cambered bars. So the bars will come and drop down, and you can grip lower, and so that's also a lot easier in your shoulders too. But initially, I'll usually take a grip that's a little wider, definitely wider than the shoulder width, and almost outside to where the plates would go. The next thing is going to be considered is where you want your bar placement. So you can go high up on the trap, or you can definitely go low bar and down lower on the scapula, which typically, like powerlifting, you see a lot of people do low bar. It does make give you a little bit more of a mechanical advantage when you low bar, but you will be having to sit back a lot farther when you squat. So if you have one more ham glute involvement, you could low bar. Doing high bar, you tend to stay more upright and squat straight down, and so you could have more emphasis towards your glutes. So depending on what you're trying to bring up, that's where I would say it would depend on your bar placement as well. So we get underneath the bar. So I typically have I'm kind of between high bar and low bar. I'll come up out of the racks. You don't need to take big steps back. I see lots of guys just doing away, excessive movement, walking way out. You're wasting your energy coming out. You're also at a safety issue too. Obviously, if you just come up out of the rack, you just need a slight step back. If you had any issue, you could actually fall back into the catches and be in still a good spot. So initially for doing like a closer stance, so just trying to do overall leg development and not bring a lot of quad into it, I would do slightly shoulder width, keeping the toes pointed slightly outward. And the big thing with toe position is you want your toes and knees going in the same direction. If you have your toes straight forward and your knees are starting to push out, you're going to put a lot of stress on the knee joint. So have someone watch you or try to pay attention to the direction and make sure your knees are going in the same direction as your toes. Now, to initiate the movement for squatting, we start it at the hips. So we start by breaking at the hip joint and flexing the hips. And so it's going to start by pushing back. And then we continue our squat, continue sitting backwards. And once we reach our depth, you see I can go fairly low. I have good joint mobility. For me, I just go as low to my hands touch my calves. But I'm in a safe position. I can keep a neutral spine. I can keep my chest up. And then before pressing up, I start exhaling and keep pushing the hips towards you. Once you complete the lift, since I'm close enough, I can just drop back in. Now the next setup is if you wanted to do like a wide stance squat. And like I said, this will bring more glutes and hams in. It also can bring a lot of adductor into the movement too. I powerlifted for a long time, so doing wide stance, sumo deadlift and squats really developed my adductors, and you can still see it on my stage shot. So I typically won't do a lot of wide stance anymore, but it's the same thing for the setup initially. And if you're doing like a wider stance, high bar is kind of nice, especially keep you a little bit more upright, especially if you're flexible. So you come up out of the rack, you're gonna take your little step back, and sometimes you might need to take a few more steps to kind of widen up. And it's the same thing. You want your toes and knees going in the same direction. Usually your toes are gonna be angled out slightly more, probably around 45 degrees. And you need to be flexible to be in this position, so make sure that you do have good mobility and you're able to have flexibility within your adductors and hips to go wide stance. Because we still want your knee and ankle to be right above each other, and so your leg should be at 90 degrees with the ground. So again, we initiate at the hips, pushing the glutes backwards. Once we reach depth, then we can start exhaling as we come up and push the hips back forward into position, and then just go drop back into the rack. So that's it, guys, on squatting. Check me out on the forums, my Q&A, ask me any questions you have. Also have my journey logged up if you want to follow along and see what kind of workouts I'm doing and how I'm using squats.